Well, good afternoon. It's Wednesday and it's been a couple of weeks, hasn't it? I have unfortunately had COVID, so I've not been around. You wouldn't have wanted to listen to me last week or the Wednesday before. So I'm sorry not to have been here, but I'm back and I'm fighting fit again, as those people who were in my exercise class this morning would say. Um, this week, I'm going to be talking about the very common question, which is, can I be or go on HRT post menopause? That's a question that comes up quite frequently. And shortly behind that question, I often get, Sam, I'm nearly 60. And 60 seems to be a number that keeps popping up. Can I go or be on HRT? So I'm going to tackle those questions and hopefully give you some answers. Now, at the beginning of this video, it's always really important for me to say, remember, I am a nurse. I'm a menopause nurse and menopause expert, but I'm not a doctor. And therefore, any advice I give is for you to feel empowered and armed so that you can then contact your healthcare provider and talk through the specific issues for you, because we are all so different, aren't we? And what is a risk for one person may not be a risk for another. Right at the top of this, I'd also like to tell you about this book called Estrogen Matters. I know when people have said, where can I read more information? People have talked about this book, and it's a really good book by Dr. Avron Blooming. And it's really quite readable. And for those of you who like to geek out on readable geek rather than too scientific geek, it's a really nice way of informing yourself about the HRT history in the past and where we're at now. So let's just recap quickly then. HRT after menopause. HRT, hormone replacement therapy or treatment, generally made up of 2 drugs, if not 3, estrogen, progesterone and testosterone. In the UK, I would say most people start with the estrogen and the progesterone, and the testosterone may only be added a little bit later on. Sorry, my phone was pinged and I was making sure it wasn't a question. And I think one of the things that's really important to say is that when I talk about HRT in this circumstance, in particular for people post-menopause or perhaps in their late 50s and 60s, I'm always talking about the estrogen that is through your skin, transdermal or topical, rather than estrogen that is taken orally. So I will generally be talking about estrogel or Lenzetto spray or patches when I'm talking about this. I'm not talking about estrogen tablets. So I think the first question is, you were started on HRT a few years ago and you're getting up to being 60 or 59, or perhaps it's been 5 years and you've read somewhere that after 5 years you've got to come off HRT. Is that true? What's going to happen? Are you going to wake up in the night again and all of those symptoms are going to come flooding back? No, is the answer there. Unless there is a particular medical reason for you that you and your doctor have discussed, there is no reason for you to now stop that topical estrogen and oral progesterone after 5 years. You can stay on it as long as the benefits outweigh the risks for you. And then the next one is, well, okay, I've been so scared up until now. Everybody's talked about relenting or giving in, that whole competitive menopause thing that we don't like. And I've really been persuaded that actually my symptoms are still so bad that actually, having now looked at the research, I realise that HRT does have some protective benefits for me. Can I start it? Yes. So let's just look at those protective benefits. Estrogen is hugely cardioprotective. I think you've probably heard me say that as your estrogen levels decline, your heart isn't protected in the same way from cardiac events such as strokes or high blood pressures or heart attacks or clots, those sorts of things. Your heart is not protected when you don't have as much estrogen on board. And so therefore, if you put some estrogen back in, your heart then becomes more protected again. Equally, your bones aren't as protected by a decline in estrogen. They become much more brittle. And so if you fall over and land on your outstretched hand or your hip or something, we are much, much more likely to get a fracture. And a fracture stops you living your life, and therefore that becomes a life-changing thing. So by having the right amount or a better amount of estrogen on board, you're much less likely for that to happen. So estrogen is cardioprotective, it's bone protective, and in fact in the case of HRT, it's protective against many stomach types of cancers. So everybody always thinks of estrogen as breast cancer, but actually it's protective against a whole host of other things. You can look at the British Menopause Association website if you want to and find out those things in more specific detail. So if you were considering now the fact that actually it's going to help your hot flushes, your night sweats, your anxiety, and a whole host of other things that are still bugging you, if HRT is something that you've now decided you want to look into more, it's not too late. I think at this point it's a really good reason to point out that you're not going to get the same amount of protection from it as somebody who starts when they're 48, 49 or 50, because basically they will have had that estrogen on board for much longer. So you're not going to get the same level of protection because you're starting it 10 years later. But it doesn't mean that it can't afford you some protection against those things in the future. And then there have been people that I've worked with, particularly in my Move Over Menopause program, who have said, oh my gosh, I came off it. I went on it 10 years ago and I came off it because I was so scared about the research that came out with breast cancer that I came off it. So can I go back on it? Once again, the answer is yes. As long as we're talking about topical, through your skin, HRT, you could go back to your doctor and say, you've done the research, you're aware that it has some protection for you, you're aware that you won't have the protection for the 10 years because you've missed out on some, but that you would like that protection now, and go and have that conversation with your healthcare provider. There is evidence that shows that there is no increase in cardiovascular events, strokes, heart attacks, that sort of thing, in women who start HRT 10 years post-menopause. So that is part of the new findings that have come out. So there is a lot of evidence to say that it is hugely protective. Now, obviously, there are going to be some people who still, despite all of this that I've said, still can't take HRT because they have had an estrogen-dependent cancer. So that's a cancer that feeds off estrogen. So you put more estrogen back in and the cancer's, yes, great. So there are going to be some people for whom it is not a possibility. And for those people, I really want to reassure you that HRT is only part of the equation. The way we live our life, the way we get enough rest, the way we get enough movement and exercise, the way we deal with our stress is all as important as this HRT that you've taken on board. I was describing it the other day to somebody who said to me that she really wanted to start HRT because X, Y, and Z. And I said it's a little bit like having a cupboard, that when you open the cupboard, all the clothes, all the shoes, everything falls out. You wouldn't just go and buy another cupboard, would you? You'd say, right, okay, let's tidy this cupboard out. Let's throw away everything we don't want. Let's get rid of the things that we don't need anymore. Let's sort things out and put them in places where we can see them. And having done that, lo and behold, you look at that cupboard and you think, cupboard's great, don't need a new cupboard. And I think that we can be a little bit like that. HRT is not a panacea. It's not a sticking plaster. It's an addition to living a menopausal or perimenopausal life that gives you extra protection. And if you don't want or can't take that protection, it doesn't mean you can't do a whole load of other things to keep your cupboard tidy. And that's the sort of thing that I do with people alongside giving out information like this. So I hope that's been really helpful for those of you. And when I asked people what they wanted to know about, that was one of the questions that came up quite frequently about HRT post-menopause. That's when you haven't had any periods for 12 months or into your 60s. What are the risks? What are the benefits? So please be reassured, go back and talk to your healthcare provider. He or she will be very willing and open, I'm sure, to have that conversation with you. And if they're not very willing and open, come back to me, because as I've said before, I work with menopause specialists who are willing and open to have that conversation and can take that conversation a bit further down the line. Hope that's okay for you. I will be back next week when I will be talking to you about how to sleep better. Oh my gosh, doesn't everybody want a little bit of better sleep? Have a good weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye.